My bride turned heads at the wedding. She put me alone at the losers' table and told me cruel stories about how I was a pathetic old woman who wasn't even wanted by the father of her own child. But when a mysterious stranger whispered to me, "Pretend you're with me at dinner," what should have been a nightmare night turned into the sweetest revenge I could ever imagine. I sat alone at the farthest table in the living room at my only son's wedding, watching everyone else enjoy themselves. I couldn't help but wonder how I'd gotten there. My name is Louise, I'm 45, and after his father disappeared when he learned of my pregnancy, I'd spent the last 24 years raising Michael alone. It wasn't easy, but I managed to provide for all my son's needs: love, education, and values. Michael grew up to be a talented lawyer. It was also at the same firm where he met Camille, an ambitious young woman from a traditional wealthy family. From the moment I met him, I sensed something was wrong. He searched me and slumped to the ground, as if he were appraising a second-hand object. His comments were always laced with a contempt he didn't even try to hide. "And then, Louise, you never thought about getting married again. It must be so sad living like this," he'd say with feigned sweetness at family dinners. "Michael tells me he's never gotten over being abandoned while pregnant. What a trauma, isn't it? Some women can't handle a man." I always swallowed my anger and responded with a polite smile. I was happy raising Michael. Not everyone needs a partner to feel complete. Of course, he'd respond with that poisonous smile. That's what all single women say to sleep better at night. Michael didn't seem to notice these harsh words. He loved Camille very much, and I didn't want to be the mother who interfered with his child's happiness. So I swallowed my anxiety and tried to get closer to him, even though everything inside me was screaming at me to stay away. Wedding preparations began, and surprisingly, I was practically cut off from everything. Camille and her mother Beatrice made all the decisions. When I offered to help with the invitations or the decorations, I was met with impatient looks. "Don't worry, Louise," Beatrice would say, in the same condescending tone as her daughter. "We've got everything under control. You have plenty to worry about on your own. Besides, we want an elegant wedding. You know? A certain elegance." The implication was clear. I didn't have the tact required to contribute to the perfect wedding they were planning. The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner, I felt the first real blow. Camille gathered everyone together to explain the table arrangements. "And Louise," she said, gesturing at the table map in the hall, "you'll be sitting in the corner at table 18. I glanced at the map and saw that table 18 was the farthest from the main stage, almost next to the entrance to the restrooms. I noticed the pitying looks from the other guests. "Wouldn't it be better if she stayed at the head table?" Michael finally asked, noticing something odd. "After all, she is my mother." Camille smiled that familiar, memorized smile. "Honey, the head table is only for couples. Since your mother is like that, you know, we thought it best to leave him alone with others." She was in the same mood. Then she lowered her voice, but not so much that I couldn't hear. "We don't want him to look like an abandoned kitten in the official photos, do we?" Michael hesitated for a moment, but as he always did, he finally gave in. I knew then that the wedding would be just the beginning of a life where my son would always choose his wife's side, no matter how wrong she was. The morning of the big day, I tried to cheer myself up. I put on the red dress I'd bought especially for the occasion. I made sure to dress impeccably. My hair, my makeup, everything was perfect. I wouldn't give Camille the pleasure of seeing me sad. The wedding itself was beautiful, I had to admit. The hall was decorated with white and gold flowers, and my son was radiant at the altar. I cried when he said his vows, proud of the man he had become and still afraid of the family he was entering. But the real humiliation began at the reception. When I arrived at the elegant ballroom of the Montaigne Hotel, Camille, one of her maids of honor, greeted me and led me to my table with a mischievous smile. "Here's your table, Señora Louise," she said, and pointed to a small table in the far corner of the room. "Camille thought you'd be more comfortable away from the spotlight. You know, single women of a certain age tend to shy away from these kinds of events." I sat back and observed who my table mates would be. An old woman talking about her cats, a distant cousin of Camille's who clearly had a drinking problem, and two bored young men who spent the entire evening staring at their cell phones. No one bothered to speak to me. From my corner, I could see Camille circling the guests like a queen, occasionally stopping to whisper something, glance at me, and then exchange malicious smiles. It didn't take a genius to know it was me. Poor Louise, I heard her say to a group of guests near my table. Her voice was deliberate, loud enough for me to hear. Can you imagine being abandoned, pregnant, and never finding a man? Michael practically made it up himself, poor thing. She was busy crying in the corners. When Camille decided to make the formal introductions, she reached the pinnacle of humiliation. She grabbed the microphone and started introducing the important people at the party. And of course she couldn't resist mentioning Michael's mother, she said, gesturing at me in my isolated corner. Louise, who had raised Michael alone, a true warrior, always focused on her work and her son, hadn't had time to find another love, had she? Or maybe no man was interested enough to care for a woman with her baggage, her children, and her past. The whole room turned to look at me, some with pity, others with that familiar, condescending smile. I forced a smile and waved politely, feeling my face burn with embarrassment. But who knows, it's not your lucky day, Camille continued. There are a few single men here, but most are looking for someone a little younger. Don't pay attention to Louise. Laughter echoed through the room. I saw Michael with an uncomfortable expression, but he didn't say anything to defend his own mother. Something inside me snapped. I dedicated my life to my son, and now he was letting his wife humiliate me in front of everyone. I was about to grab my bag and quietly leave when I felt someone pull the empty chair next to me. I looked up to see a sharply dressed man in his mid-40s, wearing a dark gray suit that accentuated his broad shoulders. He had a strong face, piercing brown eyes, and a smile that seemed genuine and rare in that environment. Imagine you're with me, he whispered, sitting comfortably next to me. I stood there for a moment staring at him in surprise. I saw what happened, he continued in his low, warm voice. No one deserves to be treated like this, especially the groom's mother. You don't even know me, I replied, still skeptical. He smiled, a smile that reached his eyes. I'm Raphael, a childhood friend of Camille's father, but I clearly don't share the same family values. You must be Louise, the incredible woman who single-handedly raised that talented lawyer. I felt something strange in my chest, a mixture of surprise and gratitude for this stranger who could see beyond the stories Camille had told me. Why are you doing this? I asked. Raphael shrugged. Let's just say I have a particular aversion to people who use their power to humiliate others. He added with a mischievous smile, it would be a great pleasure to be considered the companion of the most elegant woman at this party. His sincerity made me feel beautiful for the first time that evening. I stared at him, considering my options. I could sit alone and continue to absorb this humiliation, or I could accept this charming stranger's help and maybe, just maybe, give Camille a taste of her own poison. Okay, I finally answered. What's the plan? Raphael's smile widened. First, let's give them something to actually talk about. He took my hand and kissed it gently, his eyes fixated on mine. Do you trust me? For some inexplicable reason I did. And so began the night that would forever change the course of my life. The effect was almost immediate. It was clear Raphael was a big shot. I sensed it in the appreciative looks he drew from several guests. I soon realized Camille was watching us from across the room. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and anger. He's watching us, Raphael whispered. Great, he replied with a wink. Let's give him something to look at. Raphael began acting as if we'd been together for a long time. He poured me champagne, leaned in to listen to what I had to say, and laughed with genuine interest at my jokes. But most surprising of all, he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. So you've started your own interior design business? He asked, genuinely impressed when I mentioned my small business. Yes, I started with small projects when Michael started college. I needed something to keep me busy when the house was empty, I explained, feeling surprisingly comfortable sharing the details of my life with this stranger. That's wonderful, Louise. Raising a child alone is a huge accomplishment, but starting a business is also extraordinary. His words were sincere, without the condescending tone I'd grown accustomed to. It was refreshing to be seen as admirable, not pitted. As we chatted, I noticed a few people starting to notice us. The Lozers table suddenly seemed like the most interesting place at the party. Even the younger ones put down their cell phones to listen in on our conversation. Who is he? I heard one of Camille's aunts ask the other. I'd never seen Louise with anyone before. He's Raphael Meanies, the other replied respectfully. He owns that luxury hotel chain. What does he do with it? The murmur spread quickly through the room. Raphael Meneses. Suddenly the name made sense. I'd read about him in business magazines. A successful businessman known for his philanthropy and his secretiveness about his private life. Now, despite everything, he seemed to be keeping me company. Are you that Raphael Meneses? I asked quietly. He smiled, a little embarrassed. I'm guilty, but that doesn't matter now. What matters is that Camille looks like she's about to drown in that glass of champagne. I glanced in the direction indicated and saw that Camille looked genuinely surprised. Camille was whispering urgently to her mother as they both looked our way. Michael beside her looked equally surprised. The expression on Camille's face, that mixture of shock, anger and yes, jealousy, was like a balm to my wounded pride. It didn't take long for Camille to decide to intervene. She came over to our table with that familiar lopsided smile. Louise, I didn't know you knew Raphael, she said in her oddly raspy voice. What a pleasant surprise. You never told me you had such a distinguished friend. Raphael rose politely to his feet, but in a protective gesture that surprised me, he placed one hand lightly on my back. Camille, congratulations on your wedding. Everything is wonderful, he replied sincerely, but there was a slight coldness in his eyes. Thank you, but I'm curious. How do you know each other? Louise has never mentioned anyone in her life, she said, looking at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We always assumed she was, too lonely to have a social life. Before she could answer, Raphael chimed in. Some of life's most beautiful stories are the ones we keep to ourselves. Don't you agree? Not every relationship needs to be on public display to be valuable. The subtle yet truthful comment silenced Camille for a moment. She blinked, clearly unaccustomed to being contradicted, especially at her own wedding. Of course, she replied, coming to her senses. I hope you're enjoying the party, even in this corner. Unfortunately, we had to arrange the tables according to their status. And you understand? According to their status? Raphael asked with feigned innocence. And is it interesting that you put Louise here, considering her intelligence, grace, and the intelligent son she raised alone? Unless, of course, you judge people by more superficial criteria. I'd say her status is quite high. Camille blushed. I didn't mean it, it was just a matter of logistics. Actually, Raphael said with a charming smile, we were thinking of dancing. The music is perfect. By the way, who is your decorator? Louise did a wonderful job with the interior designs. Maybe you should hire her for your new place. She held out her hand, and I accepted without hesitation. I could feel Camille's fierce gaze on me as we walked toward the dance floor, and I savored every second of this small victory. She's so angry, I commented, trying to suppress a smile. This is just the beginning, Raphael replied, leading me toward the center of the floor. She asked if I knew how to dance. It's been so long I don't even remember, I admitted, suddenly excited. Don't worry, follow me. And so I did. Raphael was dancing brilliantly, and soon we were flowing around the floor as if we'd been dancing together for years. The orchestra was playing a dance song, and his arms around my waist made me feel safe and valued. Everyone's watching, I whispered, feeling both exposed and powerful. Let them watch, he replied. They're seeing what they should have seen all along. She's an extraordinary woman who deserves to be celebrated, not hidden. As we danced, I saw the official wedding photographer approach. He was clearly interested in the mysterious couple dominating the dance floor. Do you mind? He asked, raising his camera. Not at all, Raphael replied, pulling me closer. After all, these moments deserve to be captured, don't they, darling? I smiled for the camera, knowing those photos would forever be etched in Michael and Camille's official wedding album. A permanent record of the night, the poor bachelorette stole the show with one of the most attractive men in the room. The music ended, but Raphael didn't let go of my hand. Instead, he guided me back to the table, strategically positioning himself so we could all see. He ordered champagne for us and began asking me questions about my life, my dreams, my interests, questions no one had bothered to ask in a long time. Throughout the evening, I noticed a change in people's demeanor. The same guests who had previously looked at me with pity now looked curious, even jealous. Camille's aunts, who had treated me with disdain, were now trying to get more information about my relationship with Raphael. "How long have you known each other?" one of them asked, barely concealing his curiosity. "Long enough," Raphael replied, winking at me. "So why haven't we heard of you before, Raphael?" another asked, his tone suggestive of doubting the authenticity of our relationship. "Not everyone has to advertise every aspect of their lives," he replied softly. "Louise and I prefer quality over publicity, don't we, darling?" The quiet revenge was sweeter than I could have ever imagined. Every surprised look, every surprised whisper, every look of disbelief from Camille's friends and family felt like small victories. The night went on like that because Raphael was there, and he made me feel like the guest of honor, not the pathetic single mother who needed to hide. I saw Camille's face flush with anger when someone remarked what a lovely couple we made. But the real turning point came at the traditional moment when the bride tosses her bouquet. "All single ladies to the dance floor," the DJ announced. I stood there, unwilling to participate in this tradition that would cement my status as available and helpless in Camille's eyes. "Come on, Louise," Camille called, her voice filled with false cheerfulness. "Who knows, maybe you're just not lucky. Maybe after all these years you'll finally find a man." I knew it was a trap. He wanted to humiliate me once more, to place me in the middle of a crowd of much younger women eager to grab the bouquet. But before I could respond, Raphael stood up. "Indeed," he said calmly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't think Louise needs luck or a bouquet to prove her worth. She already has everything a person could want. Honesty, talent, beauty, and a generous heart. Things, unfortunately, even a fairy tale wedding couldn't guarantee someone who wasn't born with them." A stunned silence fell over the room. I saw Camille's face contort in anger, and for a moment, I felt a sense of satisfaction I'd never felt before. This wasn't just about defending my honor. It was about someone finally exposing Camille's cruelty for what it truly was. She tried to brush it off as if it were all some big joke. "Oh, come on. It's just a fun tradition." Raphael pointed out that some traditions merely perpetuate outdated ideas, like that a woman needs a man to be complete, or that a bride has the right to humiliate the guests at her own wedding. A few murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. Camille seemed to have shrunk a few inches, her prom queen glow suddenly gone. Michael approached us, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Mom, what's going on?" He'd actually spoken to me for the first time that evening. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised so lovingly, and felt a mixture of love and disappointment. "Nothing, darling," I replied quietly. "Just enjoying the party with Raphael." "You never mentioned Raphael?" Michael asked, glancing suspiciously at the man next to me. Raphael held out his hand to Michael. "Raphael Meneses, it was nice to meet Louise's son. Louise talks a lot about you. He's proud of the man you are. But he might be a little disappointed that you can remain silent while your mother is being made fun of in front of everyone." Michael pretended to be embarrassed, but he wasn't. He acted like a hero. He quickly shook Raphael's hand, who was clearly surprised. "Meneses de impresses Meniso." Music. Raphael nodded with a friendly smile. "I hope you value your mother as much as she deserves, Michael. Women like Louise are rare. Strong enough to raise a child alone, kind enough to endure insults for that child's love, and graceful enough not to ruin your wedding, even if she'd be completely justified." I saw a change in my son's eyes, a realization, perhaps even shame. He looked at me, then at Raphael, and then at Camille, who was now standing beside him and trying to smile as if nothing had happened. "Mom, let's talk later," he said finally. "Of course, son," I replied with a calm smile. "Enjoy your day. This is your celebration." As Michael walked away, carrying a visibly shaken Camille, Raphael turned to me. "Did I go too far?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "It was perfect," I replied, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. As if, after years of shrinking so as not to bother anyone, I'd finally been granted my own space. "You were always right," he said. There was something in his eyes that made me believe he meant it. He just needed someone to remind him. The night wore on, and Raphael stayed by my side as if he'd always been where he was meant to be. We danced 2 more times, chatted with other guests who suddenly seemed very interested in getting to know me, and even shared a few stories from our own lives. I learned that Raphael had been divorced and childless for 5 years, and devoted most of his free time to a foundation that helps single mothers establish themselves financially. I told him about my journey raising Michael, the challenges and joys I'd experienced, and how I'd built my home decor business from the ground up. At one point, as we sat in a quieter corner of the room, he said, "You're truly extraordinary, Louise. Most people would have crumbled under the pressure you went through, but you thrived." His words warmed my heart, not because I needed validation, but because he truly saw not just my situation but my strength. The party began to break up around midnight. Camille and Michael were getting ready to leave for their honeymoon, while the guests were lining up to say goodbye. Raphael and I stood back watching the scene unfold. "I think we succeeded," he commented, a slight smile on his lips. "What did we succeed?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He wanted to change the narrative. "You're no longer the pathetic single mother. You're the mystery woman with the charming businessman. And your bride has learned a valuable lesson about public humiliation." I laughed at the imagery. "I don't know if that's better or worse." "Different," he replied. "And sometimes different is all we need to shatter people's expectations and their claim on our lives." I looked at him, I really did, and saw not only the handsome, successful man who had come to my rescue, but also someone who seemed genuinely kind, someone who had chosen to spend the night defending a stranger, simply because it was the right thing to do. "Why did you do it?" I asked again, trying to understand. "Why did you care about what happened to me?" Raphael thought for a moment before answering. "My mother was a single mother too. She faced the same prejudices, the same little assumptions. When I saw what they were doing to you, I couldn't sit still. And honestly, there was something about you that captured my attention from the moment I walked into this room. A quiet dignity, even when they tried to take it from you. There was a history there, a pain maybe, but this wasn't the time to explore it. Instead, I reached out and touched her hand lightly. "Thank you," I said. "You made what could have been one of the worst nights of my life into something special, and you gave me the sweet satisfaction of seeing Camille's face when she realized her plan to humiliate me had failed miserably." He turned his hand so our palms met, his fingers intertwining lightly with mine. "The night doesn't have to end here, you know." I felt a flush rise up my neck that I hadn't had in years. "What do you suggest?" "Nothing inappropriate," he replied immediately. "There's a nice cafe nearby that's open late. Can we continue our conversation without all this?" He gestured around, taking in the splendor of the wedding. Social pressure. The offer was tempting. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to prolong this unexpectedly delightful evening. But another part, the cautious part that had been hurt before, was hesitant. What if this is just part of the show? I asked, voicing my fears. The perfect revenge. It wasn't terrible, but then we'd go back to our separate lives. Raphael looked me in the eyes. "Louise, the show had ended the moment the last person stopped paying attention to us. It's just you and me now, two people who can enjoy each other's company a little longer, no pretense, no motive, just possibilities." There was something so sincere in his words, in his eyes, that I felt my defenses begin to crumble. After years of putting everyone else's needs before my own, maybe it was time to allow myself this little pampering. "Okay," I decided. "Let's have that coffee." The smile on Raphael's face made my heart skip a beat in a way I hadn't felt in decades. We picked up our coats, and everyone's attention was still on the bride, and we snuck out the door while the groom was at the wedding. We passed Camille and Michael on the way out. Camille shot me a look of confusion and anger. It was as if her perfect world had been shattered. It had been turned upside down, and she didn't know how to process the fact that my poor mother-in-law, whom I hated so much, was leaving the wedding on the arm of one of the richest and most respected men in the city. "Are you leaving now?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. "The party just started." "For us it started hours ago," Raphael replied, smiling politely. "And now we have other plans." Michael looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Confusion, yes, but also a touch of admiration. "Mom," he said softly, "we need to talk when I get back from our honeymoon." "Of course, son," I replied and hugged him quickly. "Enjoy your trip. We'll talk when you get back." Camille couldn't resist one last jab. "What a surprise, Louise. You and Rafael Meneses, who would have guessed? It must be new, right? Or have you been hiding it all this time? His tone implied that our relationship was clearly a sham, a pathetic attempt to appear less lonely. It was my turn to smile confidently. Camille, some people choose to display every aspect of their lives for external validation. Others understand the value of discretion. I paused deliberately before adding, that's something you can learn one day. After all, a marriage is so much more than one big event, isn't it? Her eyes widened at his unexpected response, and Camille, perfectly calm for a moment, finished with a perfectly friendly tone. Congratulations again on the wedding, I finished, though my eyes conveyed a different message. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. As I walked away, I heard Rafael whisper, "Great. I learned from the best," I replied, feeling lighter than I had in years. We stepped out into the cool night, and I noticed Rafael smiling as he walked toward his car. It wasn't just the satisfaction of revenge, though that was definitely part of it. It was the feeling of finally having my dignity back. I had won, I had refused to be scorned, I had proven to Camille, to Michael, but most of all to myself, that my worth didn't depend on being with someone, that I deserved someone who truly valued me. The late-night cafe was just as Rafael had described. Relaxed, unassuming, and inviting to conversation. We sat at a corner table, away from the few people still arriving at that hour. "What would you like?" Rafael asked. "Cappuccino would be perfect." Still feeling a little unreal, I answered as if I were living someone else's life. I took the opportunity to examine him more closely as I ordered. In the soft light of the cafe, I could see details that had escaped the dramatic lighting of the reception hall. When he smiled, the small crinkles at the corners of his eyes revealed a lifetime of sincere expressions. The confident but unassuming movement of his hands, the missing wedding ring on his left finger confirmed his history of divorce. "Are you analyzing me?" he asked with a smile. He turned his attention back to me. I was surprised, but I decided to be honest. Yes, Rafael Meneses had been the one to talk about single mothers at hostile weddings. "I'm trying to understand who you really are when you're not playing the avenging knight in armor." He laughed, his voice rich and sincere. "Ask whatever you want to know. Why did you really help me today?" "The whole truth." Rafael took a sip of the espresso he'd ordered and considered my question. "The whole truth has several layers," he began. "Yes, my mother was a single mother, and seeing your treatment infuriated me." But he also paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Besides, even before the microphone scene, I saw something about you that caught my attention." "What?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Dignity," he replied simply. "You were sitting at that awful, clearly separated table, but you held your head high. You weren't hiding or begging for attention or sympathy. There was a quiet strength about you that captivated me." His words caught me off guard. For too long, I'd seen myself through the glasses others used to judge me. The single mother, the woman who couldn't defeat a man, the poor thing who sacrificed her personal life for her son. I never imagined anyone could look at me and see strength, much less honor. I felt myself. I didn't feel very valuable, I admitted. I felt humiliated and invisible. To be honest, part of me savored the small revenge of seeing Camille's face when you showed up. After all the cruel things she'd said, it was satisfying. "That says more about them than it does about you," Rafael replied, his eyes meeting mine intensely. "Some people only feel important by belittling others. Your bride seems to be one of them." As for revenge, he shrugged with a thin smile. "Sometimes a little dose is just the medicine we need, especially when it's achieved by demonstrating your true worth, Camille." I sighed, thinking of the young woman my son had chosen to share his life with. She seemed to genuinely enjoy making me feel inferior. From day one, it seemed like she needed to put me in a box of failure to feel secure. "Insecure people often lash out at things they secretly admire or fear," Rafael observed. "Perhaps your independence, your strength as a single mother, is something she secretly envies or fears she doesn't have." I never thought of it that way. "Do you think she's afraid she won't be a good mother one day? Or maybe she's afraid she won't have the strength to overcome a challenge like you." People who grow up in an environment where everything is handed to them often fear their own fragility. There was an insight in her observation that made me look at her with renewed interest. "You seem to understand a lot about human nature." In my job, you learn to read people, she replied with a slight smile. In life, you learn to recognize patterns, especially after you've made your own mistakes. When our coffees arrived, I took a natural break from the conversation. It was then that I thought about the strangeness of the situation. I was sitting in a cafe after midnight with a man I barely knew but who seemed to understand parts of me I'd somehow forgotten. What about you? I finally asked. What's your story? Is divorce a staple for single mothers? It seems like there's so much more to it. Raphael nodded and slowly swirled his mug. My mother raised me alone after my father decided a family was too restrictive for his dreams of becoming a musician. She worked 3 different jobs to keep me in school. She never complained. She never let on how hard it was, but I did. Her eyes softened at the memory. He passed away 7 years ago. Cancer. One of my biggest regrets is that he didn't live to see the success of the hotels. Everything I did was for him, to prove his sacrifice was worth it. I'm sure you know that, I said softly. He smiled a rueful smile. As for the divorce, I married a very similar daughter-in-law at a young age. Obsessed with status, appearances, the perfect package to show off to others. It took me a while to realize there was no truth behind that pretense. What happened? He cheated on me with one of my partners. Classic, right? She laughed, but it was humorless. The funny thing was, it wasn't the infidelity that ended the marriage. It was the realization that we'd never really known each other. We lived like actors in a play about the perfect couple, worried about what others would think. We had never been truly intimate with each other. It had affected me deeply. How many times had I felt that way? At my parents' house, at school reunions, at social events, like an actress playing the role of the feisty single mother, as if my life were a spectacle for others, never truly seen or understood in all its complexity. Since then, Raphael continued, I've decided I prefer uncomfortable honesty to comfortable lying, which explains why I can't sit back and watch your bride play you. And why am I here with you now? I'm talking about things I don't usually share on a first date. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. This is a date, of course. I felt warmth on my face. What if? I asked, surprising myself. Courage. Then I can say I had the best first date of my life. He replied with a smile that made my heart race, even though the circumstances were unusual. Unusual is putting it mildly, King. Who knew the best date I'd had in decades would begin with a very public humiliation at my son's wedding? Life has a strange sense of humor, Raphael agreed. Sometimes our worst moments lead us to our highest aspirations. There was a depth to his words that resonated with me. We're a good couple, aren't we? We've both been disappointed by each other's expectations. We were both searching for something more original. Maybe that's what brought us to this cafe today, he replied, his eyes meeting mine. A mutual recognition of souls searching for the same thing. Authenticity in a world of appearances. There was something so genuine, so free of pretense in his demeanor, that I felt at ease in a way I hadn't in years, without the need to prioritize appearances or prove myself. How's your decorating business going? He asked, slowly shifting to a lighter tone. The zone. I warmed to the question. My work was a true source of pride. It's growing. I actually started out doing small projects for friends, but now I have regular clients and even recently hired an assistant. What's your decorating style? Let me guess. Something that combines functionality with warmth. Spaces that welcome people. I looked at him in surprise. How did you know? Raphael smiled. Just a guess based on what I learned about you tonight. You prioritize substance over appearance, comfort over ostentation. I think that reflects in your work. Exactly, I admitted, impressed by his insight. I believe spaces should serve the people who live in them, not the other way around. Many of my clients are young families or busy professionals who want a home, not just a magazine-worthy house. That's very similar to the values we try to embody in our hotels, Raphael commented. We want our guests to feel like they've found a second home, not just a pretty place to take photos for Instagram. The conversation flowed naturally from there. We riffed on our business philosophies, favorite books, movies we love and hate, and places we dream of visiting. There wasn't the nervousness or anticipation that usually accompanies a first date. Perhaps it wasn't technically a date, Or perhaps it was because we'd started our relationship so unconventionally that the usual social etiquette seemed to no longer apply. I didn't even realize how much time had passed until the cafe owner politely approached and announced they were closing. "Wow," I said, looking at my watch. It was almost 3 in the morning. I hadn't been up this late since Michael was in college. Raphael seemed surprised by the time too. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Time really flies when you're with someone who makes you forget to look at your watch. We left the cafe and stood on the sidewalk. That strange moment of uncertainty that follows a pleasant end to an evening. The air was fresh, and I instinctively adjusted my shawl around my shoulders. "Can I give you a ride home?" "My car's parked near the hotel," Raphael enthused. On the one hand, it was late and a ride would be nice. On the other, accepting his ride felt like crossing another line, transforming our interaction from a game into something potentially real. But after a night of rediscovering my own courage, I decided I deserved to see where this went. "That would be very kind," I replied finally. We drove back to the hotel in comfortable silence. The parking lot was nearly empty. Most of the guests had already left. The only sounds were the click of my heels on the asphalt and the distant thud of the janitors removing the decorations from the living room. "There it is," Raphael said, pulling up beside a sleek black sedan. He opened the passenger door for me, a timeless gesture that made me smile. The car's interior was luxurious without being flashy, just as I'd expected. As we drove home, we spoke quietly about the city, the route he'd taken, the changes in the neighborhood. I did. It was casual conversation, but an undercurrent of tension, an unspoken question floated between us. "What now?" When Raphael parked in front of my small detached house, a sadness washed over me. The magical night was ending, and normal reality was about to set in. "We're here," he said, without mentioning turning off the engine and getting out of the car. "Yes," I replied, suddenly shy. "Thank you for the ride and, I mean everything tonight." "It was a pleasure," he said. And I could hear the sincerity in his voice, more than I'd expected. We were silent for a moment, the air in the car filled with unspoken possibilities. "Louise," Raphael began, turning slightly toward me in the darkness, "I want to see you again, not as part of a show or an act of revenge, but simply as ourselves." My heart raced. After all those years dedicated to Michael and work, the idea of letting someone into my life was both exciting and terrifying. "I would," I replied, fear unable to stop me. The smile that lit up his face was visible even in the dim light. "How about dinner tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? Why wait?" he asked simply. "Why wait?" Actually, after 20 years of postponing my own happiness, putting everything and everyone before my needs, why wait another day? "Tomorrow would be perfect," I agreed. Raphael got out of the car and came over to open my door. As we walked down my driveway, I felt a surge of gratitude for this strange path life has taken. What had begun as a night of embarrassment had turned into something completely unexpected. "So, I'll see you tomorrow," he said when we reached my door. "I'll see you tomorrow," I repeated, feeling strangely young again. For a moment I thought he was going to kiss me, and I wished he had. Instead, he took my hand and brought it to his lips in a gesture that somehow managed to be both old-fashioned and intensely present. "Good night, Louise." His voice was low and soft. "Good night, Raphael," I replied, walking into the house with a smile I couldn't hold back. As I closed the door and watched Raphael return to his car through the window, I realized for the first time in a long time that I was anxious. Not for tomorrow, not for Michael's sake, not for work, but for my own. It was an almost forgotten and deeply precious feeling. The next morning, I woke with a strange feeling as if I'd dreamed it all. The embarrassment at the wedding, Raphael's arrival, our conversation that night at the cafe, the surprised look on Camille's face when we left together. It seemed too surreal to be true, but then my phone rang. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Good morning. I'll confirm our dinner tonight. I'll pick you up at 7 p.m. I can't wait to continue our conversation against the backdrop of a hostile wedding." Raphael smiled at the screen, and a warmth spread through my chest. After all, this wasn't a dream. A sweet revenge against Camille was just the beginning of something that promised to be much more meaningful. Our dinner that night was the first of many. Raphael was everything I could want in a partner. Caring without being suffocating, strong without being domineering, arrogant. And most importantly, he saw me. He really saw me. Not as a pathetic single mother, but as a whole woman with her own dreams, desires, and talents. Michael and Camille returned from their honeymoon 2 weeks after the wedding. To my surprise, my son called me the day after he returned and asked to visit me alone. When he arrived, he looked nervous, almost embarrassed, an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he broke my favorite vase playing soccer as a teenager. "Mom," he began, sitting down on the living room couch. "I need to apologize." "Why?" I asked, even though I had a good idea. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd used to do since childhood when he'd felt uncomfortable. "About the wedding, about the way Camille had treated you, and how, like me, I'd done nothing about it. It wasn't right." I felt my heart expand with love for my son. Despite everything, he'd realized his mistake, and that meant a lot to me. "Thank you for saying that," I replied softly. "It meant a lot to me. I talked a lot about Camille during our honeymoon," he continued. "She wants to apologize too. I think she realized she completely misjudged you when she saw you with Raphael Meneses." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. So it took a rich, successful man to make her see me as someone worthy of respect. Michael had the decency to look embarrassed. "It wasn't just that. It was the way she talked about you, the way she defended you. She made us realize how wrong we were, how wrong I was." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "But you and him, you know? Are we really together? Or just what was it?" I asked, a voice inside me wanting Camille to admit what I suspected, to prove her wrong. A kind of revenge. I considered her question. Initially, yes, I confessed honestly. When Raphael came along and suggested we pretend, I saw an opportunity to reclaim some of the honor Camille had tried to steal from me. And yes, it was satisfying to see his poor mother-in-law's expression when she realized she was with someone like Raphael. Michael nodded slowly, digesting my honesty. But what had started as a game quickly turned into reality. I continued. "Raphael and I discovered we had a lot in common. We know each other, and that's good, very good." In fact, my son's face lit up with a genuine smile. "That's wonderful, Mom. After everything you've done for me, you deserve someone special in your life. Everything you sacrificed." "It wasn't a sacrifice, Michael," I interrupted gently. "It was a choice I would make again without hesitation." In that moment, I felt a fundamental shift in the dynamic between my son and me. For the first time since his childhood, Michael saw me not just as his mother, as someone whose identity was defined by taking care of him, but as a complete woman with a right to her own happiness. "Camille wants to invite you to dinner," he added. He seemed a little hesitant to apologize properly. I considered the offer. Part of me wanted to decline, to distance myself from someone who had treated me so condescendingly. But another part, the part that had raised Michael to be compassionate and forgiving, knew that holding a grudge would poison our future relationship. "Tell him I accept the invitation," I finally replied. "But Raphael is coming with me." Michael smiled with relief. "Of course. Actually, I think he does. He wants to get to know him properly." "I'm sure he does," I replied with a small wry smile. The same Camille who had told me that women of a certain age should accept their loneliness with honor now wanted to know my boyfriend better. Michael had the decency to look embarrassed. He said, "God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was this bad. There were so many things you didn't see, Michael, but they're in the past now." I thought about how quickly life could change after Michael was gone. In just a few weeks, I'd gone from a single mother relegated to the shadows to a woman with a newfound respect and a sparkling relationship. And it all began with a small act of revenge that blossomed into something much bigger, more meaningful. Dinner with Michael and Camille wasn't as awkward as I'd feared. Camille was visibly tense, lacking her usual arrogant confidence. Raphael kept his protective arm around my waist throughout the evening, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. "Louise," Camille said as the men talked over a bottle of wine, "I'm truly sorry about the wedding. My behavior was unforgivable." I looked at her, trying to see past the polished surface. "Why did you do this, Camille? Why are you so cruel? What have I ever done to you?" She looked away, as if genuinely ashamed. "Nothing. You were only kind to me." She hesitated, as if struggling to find the words. I think I always had this image of a perfect marriage, a perfect family. And I didn't fit that image. I took on the role of single mother. A constant reminder that not all stories follow a conventional script. Something that should be hidden away in the corner, out of sight. Camille nodded, her eyes meeting mine with genuine sincerity. This was devastating to me. I had no excuse for what I said, for the cruel things I spread about you, as if being a single mother were a moral failing rather than an incredible display of strength. You know what's even more ironic? I asked. If you had only treated me with respect, I would never have met Raphael. It was your cruelty that brought me this newfound happiness. Camille's eyes widened slightly at this revelation. Didn't you too? Didn't you know each other before the wedding? I simply didn't answer. Raphael saw me alone, heard the awful things you said, and decided to intervene. What started as an act of kindness had turned into something much bigger. He seemed genuinely shocked. So, it wasn't all a plan to make me look bad. I laughed softly. Camille, you didn't need help looking bad that night. But no, it wasn't a plan. The universe has mysterious ways. Sometimes our worst moments lead us to our best fates. As my relationship with Raphael blossomed over the next few months, my relationship with Camille gradually evolved into something more respectful, even downright warm. Michael watched this evolution with obvious relief, clearly happy to no longer be separated from the two most important women in his life. A year after we met at that wedding, on a quiet Sunday morning, Raphael proposed to me over breakfast on the terrace of his country house. The house was where we'd taken our first walk together. You changed my life, Louise, he said, taking my hands in his. Before I met you, I was successful but had no real purpose. You showed me what it meant to truly love someone. Not for their image or status, but for their heart, their mind, their very essence. With tears in my eyes, I agreed, not because I needed a man to complete my life, but because I had found someone who truly saw me, who valued me, and who loved me just the way I am. When we announced our engagement, Camille's reaction was almost comical. A mix of shock, jealousy, and an attempt to seem genuinely happy for me. How wonderful, Louise, she exclaimed, with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. Who would have thought, right? After all this time alone? Yes, Camille, I replied calmly. Sometimes life surprises us. The important thing is to be open to these surprises. Instead of giving in to judgments and prejudices, he had the decency to blush. Our wedding was an intimate celebration attended only by the truly important people. Michael was Raphael's best man, and surprisingly, Camille and I had developed a civil enough relationship that his presence didn't spoil our day. At the reception, as we danced our first dance together as husband and wife, Raphael leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Do you remember that first night I asked you to pretend you were with me?" I smiled, remembering the moment that changed everything. How could I forget? In that moment, I began to regain my dignity and rediscover my heart. Who knew a little revenge against a cruel bride could lead to such immense love? I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling complete in a way I'd never experienced before. Sometimes it takes a moment of drama to find the deepest truth. And sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well. It's finding a happiness you never knew you were looking for. I still search for that night at Michael and Camille's wedding, the humiliation, the loneliness, the anger I felt. I think about it now. But now I see that moment not as a wound but as a turning point. If Camille hadn't tried to humiliate me, Raphael would never have reached out to me. If we hadn't pretended we were together, we would never have discovered how much we belonged together. Life has a funny sense of humor. Sometimes what starts as our greatest humiliation can turn into our greatest blessing. What seems like our worst moment can be the universe itself, positioning us exactly where we need to be to find our greatest happiness. For our second wedding anniversary, Raphael and I decided to throw a party at our house. An elegant yet intimate celebration, far different from the extravagant spectacle of Michael and Camille's wedding. As I looked around our living room filled with friends and family, I briefly noticed Camille sitting alone in the corner. Michael had gone to get them drinks, and she seemed oddly vulnerable in his absence. There was something in her gaze, a mixture of admiration and perhaps a touch of regret. As I watched my interaction with our guests, I decided to approach her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. I raised my glass and held it out. Camille looked surprised, but I accepted the drink. He agreed. A toast to what? New beginnings and lessons learned, I replied. He nodded, his usually attentive and composed expression replaced by a genuine smile. Lessons learned, definitely. There was a moment of comfortable silence between us that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. You know, Camille finally said, I used to think I knew exactly how to play life. The perfect marriage, the perfect family, the perfect home, all according to a specific script. She paused and took a sip of champagne. But watching you and Raphael, how you found each other, how you built something so real from the most unlikely circumstances, has made me question a lot of the things I believe in. Life rarely follows the script we imagine, I replied. And I'm glad it does, he finished, surprising me with his sincerity. You and Raphael have something Michael and I are still trying to build. Something that's not just for show, but something genuine. Camille's admission was surprising, and I sensed that perhaps she had finally matured, shed some of the toxic attitudes that had led her to treat me so harshly. Authenticity takes time, I said gently, and it starts when we stop worrying about what others think and start focusing on what's truly important. At that moment, Michael came over to us, looking a little uneasy to see us talking so intimately. Is everything okay here? He asked, offering Camille a drink. Everything is great, I replied with a sincere smile, sharing a few thoughts about life and its unexpected paths. Michael looked from me to Camille with a relieved smile. I never thought you two would be chatting so amicably at a party. Life is full of surprises, I replied, watching Raphael approach from across the room. Some of them really are blessings in disguise. Raphael came over and wrapped his arms lovingly around my waist. Even 2 years later, his touch still sent that same electric current running down my spine. What are we talking about? He asked. How life sometimes leads us down the most unexpected paths to give us exactly what we need, I answered. He smiled. The smile that had captivated me that first night. Like a cruel bride unwillingly introducing her mother-in-law to the love of her life. Camille flushed, but a reluctant smile graced her lips. I think I deserve it. Or when a kind stranger whispers, pretends you're with me, and in the end you find so much more than you bargained for, I added, looking at Raphael with all the love I felt. Some call it a coincidence, Raphael replied, his eyes meeting mine. I prefer to call it a coincidence. Destiny. As I walked away to greet the other guests, I couldn't help but think about the incredible journey that had brought me there. From a single mother raising a child alone to a fulfilled, loved and respected woman. From a victim of humiliation to the hero of my own story. Revenge was sweet. Yes. Seeing Camille's surprise when Raphael sat next to me. Observing her jealousy as we left the wedding together. Witnessing her humiliation when she finally realized the mistake she'd made. But the real triumph wasn't instant revenge. It was discovering that I deserved more. That I deserved respect, love, and happiness. A few months after that party, I received surprising news. Michael and Camille were expecting their first child. Despite our complicated past, I felt genuine joy at this news. I was going to be a grandmother. When Camille called me personally to tell me the news, I sensed a hesitation in her voice. After I shared the details of the pregnancy, she asked, "Is there anything else?" Michael and I were so grateful that, just like you would be an important presence in the baby's life. Not just as a grandmother but also as a model of strength and resilience. He paused, his voice softening. I'd never seen anything like her in my life. A woman who showed me that it was possible to face challenges with honor. And if our baby is a girl, I'd want her to have better references than mine. Her words took me completely by surprise. Of all the milestones my life has taken in recent years, this was perhaps the most unexpected. Camille not only saw me as an important part of the family, but actively valued me for qualities she'd previously underestimated. It would be an honor, I replied, genuinely excited. When I hung up, I saw Raphael smiling at me. Good news, he asked. The best, I replied. I'm going to be a grandmother. And Camille seems to finally understand that being a single mother isn't my weakness, but my greatest strength. Raphael hugged me from behind, resting his chin on my chest. My shoulder. My life has truly been an incredible cycle, hasn't it? This man who intends to humiliate people a little more for what they value most. Ah, confirmed by a sonrisa. Yes, it's a very ironic thing. In the hospital, a little girl who decided to honor Camille and Michael Louise by sending Raphael to me was always there, happy and peaceful. Meyer and Michael observe how you travel with the unexpected miracle of love that you are aware of when you are born. Camille and Camille with makeup, joy in our days alone and with a new exhausting exhaust, yet radiant, and realize that life is not a period of true revenge or justice, but a green cycle of very serious healing and renewal. Sabes? Raphael one night while being treated in the hospital. 3 years later. If you have disappointed me with something even more incredible and it is impossible for you to do something new with your own name, it is impossible to achieve. Life is full of impossibilities that cannot be realized, and to respond to this immediately it does. Especially when I'm with Finn, it's considered a sonrisa. In my car out of town, I was reflecting on the extraordinary world I'd quickly become accustomed to. It came as a small act of revenge against a new cruelty, and it became the mayor's habit of changing my life. And so, in those moments when people are more humiliated, more vulnerable, the university prepares for a new mayor. And so, when the fingers fall silent, it tells the story of this person entering their nostrils for that moment, finding the opportunity to emerge alone. Revenge was very sweet, but love was a more beautiful feeling. And finally, the greatest revenge, Camille's humiliation, was celebrated because she was valued, amada, and exactly as she was celebrated. But before we continue, be sure to subscribe to the channel and tell us where you watched this video in the comments. We love to hear how far our stories go.